and talked about stories. I think you're one of the best storytellers that I've ever come across who can kind of take the facts and make it into like a really interesting story. And I think you're right that like if we're so involved in this culture, we don't know anything really different. We don't know, we've lost touch with how we've evolved and that sort of thing. And so it's kind of sad. So that's the story I wanted to kind of create and tell with you today is, taking us back to our hunter-gatherer evolution and what exactly was the agricultural revolution and how is that still impacting us today. So I definitely want to go there. I do want to tease something that's going to come later. You and I talked about creating an episode where you were going to teach us how to kind of deal with like cheaper cuts of meats and how to make them really, really delicious. The Boundless Body LLC board of directors really wanted you to answer to your statement that you had in our last podcast where you said filet mignon is like the shittiest cut of meat anyway. The imaginary non-existent board of directors around here really wants you to explain your work. So we're going to get to that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's take this back as far as you like. Like what made humans? What made us unique? Why is this like relatively weak, careless kind of primate? How are we the ones that have Olympics? How are we the ones that went to the moon? How are we the ones that are communicating 2 time zones away through my phone on Zoom? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is the sort of myth of progress, right? So we seem to have a story that we keep on telling ourselves, which is we're supposedly getting to something. So I think if you look at the origin story of, say, the Christian and Jewish myths, the being sorry, not myths, but the creation stories centered around that. I think that one of the more interesting aspects of it, and Daniel Quinn kind of talks about it, he said that a lot of the sort of Genesis story seems to have been a hunter-gatherer story, sort of taken in by the culture that was surrounds it, and then sort of taken in without a lot of critical thought. And so the expulsion from the Garden of Eden really, and the eating of the apple, which is the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil was how to live in this world. And so what civilization did was it said, we can be gods ourselves. We can actually take and determine what is good and what is evil. And Quinn actually uses this really well. He says, there are times when the fox eats, and there are a time when the hen eats or escapes from the fox, and both of them are good, right? It may be bad for the fox and good for the chicken if it escapes. It also may be good for the fox if he catches the chicken. And so that story of good and evil was essentially taken and made into civilization, where we said, well, we're no longer going to live by the rules that govern all life on this planet. We're going to live by these new set of rules by which we will go and tend with our own hands all of the agricultural productivity that we start to produce. And it made us sedentary. It stratified our society. As soon as you start to create agricultural surplus, then you have to guard it. Then you start to create the building of armies. You'll never create enough agricultural surplus that you don't have to take over other lands. So we start to create methodologies and means of war. Then you need kings. You need patrilineal, descendants. You need to understand and govern who your children are. It breaks apart the tribe into stratified society. Women start to lose power. They start to lose their influence, and a lot of the aspects of women's wisdom are subjugated to that sort of very masculine identity. And so then we go out into the world, and even if you look at the story of Cain and Abel, you have what is essentially a sort of pastoralist myth, which is 2 sacrifices are offered to God. You have Cain's sacrifice, which is wheat and some sort of agriculture like fruits and wheats and breads, and then you have the sacrifice of the pastoral animal, which is accepted by a god. So the story of Cain and Abel, that pastoral story is accepted by God. Cain becomes jealous of it, and he in essence kills Abel because of that jealousy. And that talks a lot about what actually happened when you start to build this agricultural surplus and then start to go out into the world. Pastoralists can't find it very difficult to coexist with the range of agricultural work that needs to be done. And so we've seen this in hunter-gatherer societies in sub-Saharan Africa, where you get places like a lot of the Aboriginal societies there are given like less and less range for them to be able to go and operate. We see this with the San people of the Kalahari. We see this over and over again, that they're given either land that is mostly can't be produced for agricultural purposes, and their range just is greatly diminished. Or you see this in places like Kenya with the Maasai, and the forced displacement that we actually see now is occurring again and again and again. Happened in the 70s, happened in the 80s, happened in the 90s. And so, yeah, I kind of want to like sort of pause there, like to see what you want to say on that. Did I get
Okay,
anywhere
so
close to your story?
absolutely. No, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, so you're talking about like we take people out of these cultures, we put them back in or we take them out, put them into civilization. They just want to go back. It's interesting. I think most people today would not want to trade in their cell phone and their air conditioned house and their nice car for that type of a life to go live in the grass. But you're telling us, and I've read this too, that those people that we took out, they always want to go back. This is probably pure speculation, but if we had it so good as hunter gatherers and we're existing in this way that we were really thriving, I don't think many people realize that. But pure speculation. But in your opinion, having studied this, why did we make that trade? Why did we start agriculture to begin with?
Yeah, you know, so the mythology around it, the stuff that civilizations told for a very long time, is that that we were starving, and that we had essentially taken all of the free range bounty that we had seen around us, and were forced into agricultural productivity in as a methodology to stave off starvation. Quinn disagrees with this vehemently. He said starving people do not create civilizations. They tend to do very rarely anything else. There is a bit of work on, you know, a climactic shift that may have occurred, in which you know, people were forced to be more sedentary, and you know, in some ways it may have just been a product of an understanding of the environment that had us kind of like starting to manipulate the environment in ways that made us a bit more sedentary. So if you start to build sort of aquifers, even small aquifers that lead towards water systems for nuts, for the mangango nuts or for the almond trees or anything like that, you will come back for harvest in and around that time, and then you start to get a huge sort of like caloric dense diet that is associated with that. Um, and so you keep on going back to some of the same places, and then you become a little bit more sedentary over time, in any number of different things. Ed, I would venture guess to say that nobody has a really good idea as to what happened. One of the things I find more interesting about the question is the secondary aspect of it, which is what made it so that this new story that we told ourselves started to take over everything. So Quinn divides the world in essentially two people, two types of people. He said, regardless of the cultures that you see around us, there are people who hoard food, who own food, and there are people who, in essence, see food as free. Nature provides, and he tries to divide it between those two. The people who hoard and own food are, in essence, modern day society, right? You know, the story I very often tell, it's like there's no Shakespeare without food. There's no Elon Musk without food. But it's an invisible entity that most people don't focus on unless, you know, there's somebody like Brett who goes through, like, you know, Brett Ender of Meat Mafia, who goes through you know, this life transforming moment where they go from a vision of chronic sickness for the rest of their lives, and then fundamentally change their diet in a way that they say, all right, well, I never want to go back to that. They become the biggest and best proselytizers for a new like food system and way of thinking about it. Most of the nutritionists and dietetic students, the ones that were really good when I had my nonprofit in New York City, most of the ones were undiagnosed celiac disease or some sort of chronic condition that was cured with food. And they became the best teachers, the people more in tune with, you know, uh, food and what it means and does for you. Diana, like, thought that she had, I think in her early teens, thought she had dyslexia. She had undiagnosed celiac disease. And so you take somebody who had lived through this like Venus fog of life where it's really, really difficult to wake up every day and go through an entire school system and all of that other stuff. And then you have this light bulb moment where you change this dietary thing. And it's like, you know, like clear days, and, you know, you become the type of person who wants to talk about this and help people for the rest of their lives. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think that the stories that we tell ourselves about economics, about the building of society, none of those actually really factor into hunter-gatherer societies. I go out and I, you know, take down a buffalo, and so I take whatever the surplus I have and I sell it to the person next to me. It doesn't really happen in agriculture, in hunter-gatherer societies. Everything is shared. The only people who get preferential treatment tend to be pregnant women and women who are nursing. Right. And so in some ways, and elders as well, because, you know, I think we start to realize like you need more protein past a certain point. And so you do get preferential treatment, but it's an understanding within that society that these are the people that actually need the iron, the extra nutrients, the organ meats and everything like that. And so our economic system is prefaced upon this idea that like one person has a thing, another person has a thing, and you trade those. I don't necessarily see a lot of that in hunter-gatherer societies unless they're trading outside of their own group. And then sometimes that bartering system doesn't look anything like what we see today as what we consider sort of modern day, like free market economics, where somebody has something and somebody needs something,
Yeah.
buyer and seller type of thing.